One of the questions I always get is, Ollie, you've learned 8 languages, correct? How on earth do you maintain all of them? To which I reply, I don't. Hello and welcome back to the StoryLearning podcast. My name is Ollie Richards and I'm really happy to be doing this again, to have started back up the podcast, or started the podcast back up. Get your phrasal verbs right, Ollie. After so long, it's been 10 years, over 10 years now since this podcast first started, and it really reminds me that after over 12 years now of growing and building StoryLearning, writing, we've sold millions of books, we've helped tens of thousands of people around the world learn a new language. Doing the podcasting kind of reminds me that I deeply care about this stuff, I deeply care about the art of language learning, about what it gives us in our lives. And so it's a real joy. So I wanted to thank you for being here. If you are not yet subscribed to the podcast or the YouTube channel, depending on where you're watching, I would really appreciate you hitting the subscribe button. It helps the podcast grow. Also, if you've been enjoying this, I'd appreciate a review on a podcast platform, wherever you get your podcasts. That would also help me out a lot. And if you're not subscribed to the YouTube channel or the audio podcast on Spotify and elsewhere, take a second to do that as well, because we all consume this stuff in different ways, don't we? Now, whenever I am on another podcast or I'm interviewed in the media, one of the questions I always get is, Ollie, you've learned 8 languages, correct? How on earth do you maintain all of them? To which I reply, I don't. And this surprises people and confuses people quite a lot, because they think, well, why on earth would you spend so long learning languages and then just neglecting them and giving them up? So we're going to talk about that today. And this comes from a question that came in originally from Leventos Demir 5707. Another great handle, who asks, how do you keep previous learned languages fresh in your brain when you immerse into and learn a new language? So basically, you learn a language, then you start a new language. How do you keep the original one fresh? Okay. So I'm going to tell you straight up how I maintain languages, which is that I don't. I simply use them. If I learn a language and then my life circumstances change, I just stop, and I have zero remorse about it. And I do that for 2 reasons. Firstly, because I know that when I'm learning a language, I'm learning that language to improve my life, for some kind of benefit that I'm looking for in my life. Be it the ability to live in another country and get by, be it to speak with friends or family. There's always a reason. But if that reason ceases to exist, then I don't want to then invest ever more parts of my time in my life into maintaining a language for the sake of it, because that would just be what's called sunk cost fallacy. I've spent all this time doing it, therefore I should carry on. But I don't want this to sound too dismissive, so we're going to dig into this. When I was learning Arabic, I was living in Egypt, and I spent the best part of a year learning Arabic. I had some great teachers, and I had so much fun because the Egyptians are just amazing people. And after the year that I was in Egypt, I came back to the UK, and I was pretty conversational in Arabic at that point. I'd learned a lot. I was far from fluent, but I was good. I could go around Cairo, I could hold my own, and it was great. But from the moment that I moved back to the UK, I had absolutely zero contact with Arabic. I had no friends back there. Obviously there are Arabic speakers in London, but I had other things to do, and I didn't want to just go out and hunt down Arabic speakers to practice with. And so I stopped. And I've stopped learning other languages as well in the past. I've been for many years. I first learned French when I was living in Paris in the year 2000. I spent 6 months learning French, got really good at it, haven't studied for 5 minutes since then, and yet I haven't lost much of it. There's some interesting research done by a researcher called Barrick in 1984. It was a classic longitudinal research study that found that learners achieving high proficiency in a language, they lose the most in the first 5 or so years after stopping learning. But then proficiency stabilizes for decades into what Barrick calls permastore. So it's a long-term retention of core knowledge. And this is exactly what I found to be true. So I learned French to an upper intermediate level fairly quickly, and then didn't study again. I came back to the UK, didn't have French friends for the most part. And yet today I can still understand and speak French, not as well as I could back then in the year 2000, it was 25 years ago, but it's not far off. I can certainly understand the majority of what I used to be able to. And this is the key point, I know that if I ever needed to get French back, let's say I was going to move to France, I know for a fact that within a couple of weeks, I could reactivate it and get back to 99% of where I was before. And so that is fine for me. Because having learned 8 languages, I've learned over 10 languages in total, but to any meaningful level, about 8 languages. And to actively maintain all of those for the sake of it would make no sense to me. It wouldn't have any, it would be huge amounts of work, huge amounts of effort. It would be at the expense of doing anything else in my life. And it would be a purely academic exercise or a purely intellectual exercise, because I have no reason for these languages anymore. Knowing that I've done it, knowing that it has improved my life, knowing that I could get them back if I needed to, is enough for me. Now, to be clear, most of the languages that I've learned, I do still use on a fairly regular basis. So I will, in my life today, I will regularly speak Spanish, Portuguese, Cantonese, Japanese, more and more. Now I'm speaking Thai, actually, since I go to Thailand fairly often. One of my favorite places in the world. And I may go for months without speaking any of these languages at all, and then suddenly use all of them at once. What that really means for me, though, is that for the languages that I care about, they are a permanent part of my life. I've often mentioned, traveling to Japan, another one of my favorite places, and being able to go there and it's the other side of the world and just immediately communicate with people in Japanese, get what I want, make friends, travel, see things. I'm so proud of that. It's so meaningful for me. And I don't need to continue to study in order to keep up my Japanese, because I know that when I go and actually need to use it, it's there. And sure, I might, I get rusty. Of course I get rusty. And I forget words, sure. But then it's all kind of part of the dance of things, because the main reason that I want to be learning these things in the first place is so that I can speak to people. That's always been my motivation to learn a language. So that's what it means to me. Now, in terms of a tactical approach, if you are starting to learn a new language, because it sounds like the questioner has started to learn a new language and now they are worried they're going to forget their old one. Here's what I would suggest. I would very simply stop studying the other language outright and just use it. So what that would mean tangibly is that, let's say I was going to start a new language tomorrow. I would give 80% of really 100% of my attention to that new language, because in order to learn a language to a good level, you need to be focused. Depth of focus equals progress in a new language. I would give it all of my focus, and I would treat it as if it was the pure object of my desire, the only language that I was trying to learn. That's what I would do. But then I would, in my downtime, I would do things like watch movies in the old language. I'd maybe meet some friends and have some conversations. So I wouldn't seek to actively study it. I would just seek to use it in a natural way, which is kind of why I have the language in the first place, right? So things that I enjoy, meeting people, watching movies, reading books, watching YouTube videos, things, maybe talking with an AI or something like that. And so I think, if it's important for you, then yes, it makes sense to kind of keep it up. So I would do that, but I generally don't actively study an older language at the same time, because I've just found over and over again from so many different language projects that if you want to make progress, you've got to actively, really deeply focused in the thing, okay? So hopefully that gives you enough confidence to do this, because you've got the knowledge that the language isn't going anywhere, all right? Even if you stop learning, if you've got this language to a good level, even if you stop learning for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 months, 12 months, it's not going anywhere. You can always get it back. But what is a waste of time, I think, is dividing your attention, continuing to study this old language out of the fear of losing it, because all that's doing is it's robbing Peter to pay Paul. You're robbing yourself of the ability to actually learn and make progress in this new language properly. So there we go, Leventos Dimia 5707. That is how to maintain another language while learning a new language. Basically, you use it, right? Use it in the way that you wanted when you planned to learn this language in the first place. Now, how do you keep the language kind of active in the background? How do you use it this way? Watching TV and movies is one of the best ways to do it, because you can do it at any point from home. And I have got a very useful resource for you called the Best Binge-Worthy Resources for Fluency. What a title. We are geniuses coming up with this title, honestly. Best Binge-Worthy Resources for Fluency. It's basically a master list of our favorite TV shows and movies in 15 different languages. And so this means you can stop just wasting time on Netflix watching a bunch of rubbish that is boring, and rather watch movies and TV shows that we have selected because they are very, very good for language learning because they're more easily comprehensible. So you can download this resources list. I'll put a link in the description for you. So I hope that's useful, and I'll see you back in the next episode of the podcast.